Hello, guys. Welcome to this event. Just quick things. If everyone could mute themselves when the speakers are presenting and talking, that would be really nice. And yeah, so Ram will be talking about TiE Dallas a little bit, and then we'll give it off to Dharma, Angelos, and Alexander. So thank you for being here, guys.
Hello, thank you, Sanju. Thank you, everyone, for joining today for this evening's panel discussion. It's obviously a very loaded topic that some of us have gone through and lived it in the last few weeks. My name is Ram Viswanathan. I'm the president of TiE Dallas here, and I want to thank our co-hosts from Houston and Austin, TiE chapters in Houston and Austin, Ram Shenoy and Jayashree Vakil as well. So this is the first ever cross-chapter event across Dallas, Houston, and Austin. First of many more to come, hopefully, in the coming months. On this topic, much has been discussed, debated, written about on what happened, how did this kind of a calamity hit us here in Texas, and we're going to look into some of this. But more importantly, we are going to focus on what can be done, what kind of solutions are in place, what kinds of development we can look forward to, and what kind of entrepreneurial and investment opportunities this might present for us on this call. It's not to diminish the pain and suffering that some even on this call may have gone through, but perhaps, if I may, because of it, we want to understand what can be done to accelerate the path of progress, path of solutions that are getting built out as we speak. The more I'm learning more by the day, and a lot of us have become experts in a very short amount of time in this whole energy sector. One other point of caution I want to mention at the outset: inevitably, this topic is going to touch on policy and politics, but we will attempt to be as apolitical as possible and not take sides in a political debate of personalities and comments and what have you. So with that said, let me just introduce, I'll be moderating the session today. We have a very esteemed panel of experts today amongst us. Dharma Dharmarajan is an energy expert, worked in the industry for a number of years, and has been a consultant to companies in the energy sector, has been part of policy making and presentations to various government bodies and private sector. We have Angelos, an economist from Austin, who has been a policy specialist himself and an investor in a number of different energy ventures. And lastly, we have Alex Rozenfeld from Houston, who's a venture capitalist and concentrating and focusing on climate technologies. And this has been a passion of his. And so we have a very, very distinguished panel that have obviously spent a lot of time understanding this sector, and we hope to learn more from. There is a number of angles to this topic. So in a very short amount of time, less than an hour that we have, we're going to see how much we can cover and keep the discussion focused. As time permits, we'll touch on some of the broad themes that I will talk about in just a second, which, as you can very well imagine, will touch on weatherization, impact of weather, market designs, what kinds of markets, designs that are out there, and what are the strengths and drawbacks of each of these kinds of options. And finally, technologies. What kinds of technologies are available? What kinds of venture possibilities exist? So there are about 3-4 broad themes that we'll touch on. But before we get into all that, let me just have a very quick round of introductions. If I may not have done justice to individual profiles, if I may ask each one of you, maybe spend a minute or two at tops to provide your perspective on this whole topic. Perhaps, Alex, you can start out and we can go down the line, Dharma and then Angelos.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. My short story is that I've been passionate about energy and the energy transition for well over 2 decades, and have seen the need for sustainable energy management across the world through travels and living in many places. What Climate Impact Capital was formed to do after 20 years of working for major companies was to establish better pathways for decarbonization and collaboration across the industry, and to ensure that capital flowed both more freely into early stage companies, but also those early stage companies and their solutions had better pathways for deployment with corporate partners. So we work to ensure that those needs are met, and we particularly focus on really ensuring we can make some major impacts into key areas such as the distribution grids for power reliability and resiliency, but also in areas like the circular economy and reusing CO2 in ways that ensure we have sustainable industries.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for that. Dharma, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the invite, Ram. And I'm going to focus on two components today. One is a very high level, a policy type approach with respect to how to address the current unreliability predicament within the confines of the existing structure. And the second piece is, as part of your planned panel discussion, I'm going to tease you guys with some slides on sustainable and futuristic approaches to reducing the impact of externalities like weather on power supply. So I'm going to save the rest of what I have to say as part of your panel discussion.
Thank you, Dharma. Angelos?
Yes, my name is Angelos Angelou. I'm an economist based out of Austin, Texas. I have lots of opinions as an economist. My focus today will be kind of how can innovation drive the electric grid and electric infrastructure, just as it does overall the whole economy. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic impact of this ice storm, as well as its implications on long-term economic development.
Okay, sounds good. So let's get started, guys. There's a lot of topics to cover, as we realize. So let's start at the very beginning. What started it all? Weather, right? Weather started it. And from what I'm gathering, from what I'm reading, the weatherization economics, if you will, are such that it really is very difficult, especially in Texas, to be able to simultaneously prepare our infrastructure both for extreme cold and extreme heat. And apparently this is a very unique phenomenon in Texas. With that said, however, there is a discussion about how some preparations could have been done of the about 350 plants that are out there, energy producing plants in the state. If each plant were to spend $100,000 to $1 million each, we would be looking at a spend of about $350 million. Just that part alone, just to be able to prep the plant. And we'll get to distribution, storage distribution later. But if you just look at that part, there are two schools of thought that may have helped, that may not have really helped a whole lot because the other components need to exist. So what is your take on that? How, is that number in the ballpark? And if we had been able to do that, would that have helped, and how much? How much would it have helped? So you want to start with that, Dharma?
My thoughts on this weatherization concept is it's sort of misplaced, because I'm going to relate back to my experiences working for a utility. We had anticipated all these issues. A typical example would be in the case of the gas-fired plants. They blamed it on the freeze up of the pipeline and whatnot. And what we usually ended up doing was we had on-site storage of oil for these kinds of circumstances where you had a pipeline freeze up. And so that from a reliability perspective, we had this backup fuel. So what they're attempting to do as part of this weatherization, I think it's sort of a patchwork approach. And in my estimation, it's not going to lend kind of help out where we need to be focused on, which is the reliability aspect. And I don't want to sound too melodramatic, but you'll all agree that electricity is one of the necessities of life, like water and oxygen. And in line with that, it is very important that we focus on those aspects of generation, transmission, and distribution, and put the responsibility in the hands of one entity who will be the central coordinator, and he can sort of address all the components associated with the supply chain of the flow of electrons. So to answer your question, this is window dressing, the weatherization that they.
What's your take, Angelos?
Well, I mean, many of the reports that I've read had some of our gas-fired power plants as well as coal could have been weatherized and withstood. You know, we could have fared better, I guess, in managing this crisis if we had more power available to us. So I really don't know, and some of the other panelists may shed light into this, whether it's ERCOT, whether it's the PUC that regulates, obviously, pricing and supply versus reliability. What might have been better coordination, if you will? What led to this crisis? I'm not yet sure 100%. The one thing for sure is that we are now having a bill of over $20 billion worth of insurance claims. Some utilities may go out of business. One of them has already done so, maybe a couple. How can we avert this crisis from reoccurring in the future? I guess that's the main topic for our discussion today, not really dwell on the past, but how can we fix
Right,
this?
that's true. That's absolutely true. Yeah. Thanks for keeping me honest about our objectives here. So Alex, anything to add to that, or?
Well, you know, let's kind of, I'll add a little bit and provide a little bit of maybe the little bit big picture is, you know, I think a number of utilities going out of business and the power spikes, and in essence, you know, maybe is the boot that the market needed for some folks to weatherize because you can make money off of it, right? So I think, you know, there certainly will now be perhaps a better incentive to do some of these things. And certainly I think, you know, if we had a better weatherization, you know, that would have helped. There's certainly, I think, an interesting point that was made around this aspect of managing the aspects of the system together. And we've had recent discussions with why, you know, are the folks that are managing natural gas and so that's the Railroad Commission and the folks that are managing power not talking to each other, and you get these complaints that, well, we would have had gas if you hadn't turned off the power to our gas compressors, right? So clearly there's a lack of coordination aspect, and I think this goes to, now if we talk about just moving on to kind of solutions, is I think there's some really simple solutions, you know, simple in quotes, that need to be addressed. And these types of simple solutions actually will help the market overall. And I think you can make a lot of money off of them, since we're talking to entrepreneurs here. And one is finding ways, non-governmental ways of ensuring these types of integration takes place, right? It does. You didn't need the government to be able to tell the owners of the gas processing plants that you need to be ensured that you don't get shut off from power, right? There needs to be folks that are going and working with the companies that do gas processing to make sure that those gas processing plants know how to make money and are managed properly. So I think there's opportunities for entities to go out and make those links and do that in a commercial way. And I think the other place where there's opportunity is in through kind of transparency. So, bringing in software solutions that let you see whether a plant is weatherized and whether to see if assets are being properly managed from a general operations and maintenance perspective.
Mhm.
And so if that becomes more visible, even within, let's say, to someone like ERCOT or to the Railroad Commission and maybe even to some public oversight bodies, that could then, better ensure that these things happen, because if no one's watching, no one's going to do anything.
Yeah. You touched on a couple of key things here. You mentioned a few words, market incentives, and embedded in that is free market that most of us are proponents of. But with that said, there is another debate that is currently underway, which says as far as market designs are concerned, whether it is a regulated market like we have in the north and the other extreme, the free market like we have it in Texas, it really doesn't really matter a whole lot. We could have had this kind of situation either type of market design. And added to that is the theory that the spread between winter prices and summer prices has been steadily going down, that it doesn't really help create a interesting, efficient market design. And third, apparently this notion that we have less cost or less prices to pay here in Texas is actually subject to debate. The Wall Street Journal article is quoting that Texans on average are paying actually 13% more than the rest of the market. Now, not to debate that too much, but that may be neither here or nor there. But from a market functioning standpoint, is there a model that you folks subscribe to that will work well here? It looks like there is a model out there. If you look at how El Paso was able to keep its lights on when the rest of the state has not been able to. So with that loaded question, I want to have one of you start. Perhaps you, Alex?
You want me to go
Thank
first?
you. Thank you. So,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah, so no, I think, I think El Paso, if we looked at it, I'm wondering if they were the one, they had a good interconnection to Mexico, because when I was looking at the real time, they actually had negative pricing in that area because they were being, paid to, they couldn't kind of get rid of that power. The internet connect was going well, but I think the issue kind of here is, where I think in terms of looking at markets and what we can think about as entrepreneurs is that it's good to have a free market, but it needs to be actually free and it needs to be transparent. And I think the problem is that, our free market isn't working here because we have lack of transparency in our free market, and therefore things aren't being priced properly, right? So it's actually not a free market because when there's no, proper flow of information, you have, basically a set of actors in the know who make the money and everyone else who pays, which is the consumer. So I think, from a kind of consumer point of view, it's not just, the transparency. I think the way we price things to residentials is archaic. It's meant to fleece the consumer, and there's still no good solutions out there that let consumers take a good choice on where they're buying power. So that's, I think, one of those issues. And I think the other place where there's certainly opportunity for entrepreneurs and for further deregulation is simpler ways for consumers to bring on board their own energy storage and solar projects, and to have, more solar and energy storage across the state, and there to be further deregulation and, and fewer rules and restrictions around getting these things sited, and which would, allow further consumer choice and further deregulation, which I think would improve resiliency. Now, it may not solve problems in extremes like this, but on the whole, I think it would improve pricing and, improve resiliency against, smaller events, which we'll have from time to time.
Okay. Yeah, Dharma, I know it's a favorite topic of yours.
Yep,
So
absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to go on a limb here, and my my position is that the current deregulation-driven market model is an antithesis to reliability. For the simple reason there's no accountability amongst the power generators, the fuel suppliers, the transmission and distribution companies, and importantly, you have about 100 plus retail electricity providers, and they confuse the public with respect to their offerings. Whereas if you go back to the old regulated model, which I am strongly supportive of, I think under that structure, you had only three kinds of rate bases: the residential, industrial, and commercial. It was pretty straightforward. And that kind of a model is what I still feel that we should go after. And it worked very well. It worked very well before deregulation, and it still works in 40 states. So my comeback would be that we need to go back to this vertically integrated utility system of yesteryear and place the what I consider the cradle to grave responsibility to each monopoly utility system like before deregulation, and they manage the fuel sourcing, the generation, transmission, and distribution and billing, and in turn they were compensated based on their investments with a fair rate of return. And that model can be resurrected now because you have all the players in place. It's just a question of assigning geographic domains and putting the responsibility onto them. So I feel that that's the way we can get back to a reliable electricity system in Texas. And so again, my focus is more on the reliability aspect. So I rest my case.
Yeah, I guess I think it's an interesting model, but it's only if there's government will to make the consumers pay for that reliability, right? And so in a system like ours, especially if we're planning, we're not planning for a climate crisis. So in Texas, last I checked, maybe they've changed the rules, but it's actually against the law to talk about climate change. If you are, or against the implied law, I should say, it's not a fixed one, but if you looked at how the system is designed, they don't design it for climate change. All the plans on ERCOT are not climate change based. And so if you go to, the danger is if you go to a system that's fully regulated, and that is not based on science, then you'll have an even worse disaster because it'll be a completely unprepared because it's not thinking long term. So I would agree if we had, a kind of a market that was kind of designed for that. I think where we are right now is it's going to be to some extent consumers and businesses for themselves until both federal and state governments decide to put in the spending to fix the system. And so I think the opportunities are going to be around microgrids and cities and regions deciding to fix it on their own, investing the capital, doing that through bonds. And then people will basically be migrating to those areas that have the systems that provide the power and the water services. And that's how it's going to get fixed. Unfortunately, that is not going to be perhaps the optimal Texas level solution or state-based solution, but I think that's where it's going to go. And there's going to be big opportunities for that. Big opportunities to make money.
I'm going to come back to the microgrid idea in just a bit, but before we get to that, Angelos, do you have anything to add in terms of what you think might be the optimal market model as an economist? Do you have an opinion? I'm sure you do, but anything to add to that?
Well, there are many models to consider out there. I guess one would have to ask the question, is it time perhaps that we may begin to rethink whether we are an island of our own or interconnected with the rest of the country?
Mm-hmm.
As far as the economic impact, I guess you would say that, believe it or not, it has both its benefits as well as its costs. It definitely costs a lot of businesses money, particularly some of the high-tech industries not having electricity to their factories, particularly the semiconductor industry here in Austin and Dallas. However, even if there was electricity, but people could not get to work, those plants would have been closed as well. The benefits is if there is $20+ billion worth of insurance money that will flow into Texas, that's an economic stimulus, just very, very similar to that of the federal government stimulating the economy. So it will have a very positive impact. My take is the state reacts on economic development terms, and I don't see any business decision about moving to Texas being delayed or being canceled because of this electric crisis. Those decisions are very long term. Texas has many benefits that outweigh that I hold on a second. The Trump business conditions in California and New York and everywhere else. So Texas continues to be very attractive to economic development. And unless there is an impact on economic development, this crisis will come and go. Yes, I mean, we'll find out what caused it. We may make some decisions about how to patch it up a little bit, but I think this whole thing is going to be forgotten a few months from now. All the investigations, all of that is going to take place, but I just don't think that this is going to be a reoccurring event, and therefore my personal opinion is that not much of a change is going to occur.
Okay, let's switch gears for a second. We talked about technology, entrepreneurial opportunities, and so on. So I have a multi-part question. Firstly, is the technology we're talking about, is it all there in place, or some of it is way far down the line, and it's just or it's just a matter of putting these technologies together? One fascinating piece of information, news story that we just came by yesterday or maybe a couple of days before, is the fact that there is a large, I think 100 megawatt plant coming up south of Houston by Gambit, one of Tesla's subsidiaries, that will power up to 20,000 homes. So that's obviously there. It is happening as we speak. You mentioned microgrids earlier, Alex. So is this an indication of a trend to come? You kind of alluded to earlier. Are we going to see more neighborhood grids, city grids, and that are all connected? And I'll take it even a step further, as this was hitting close to home here. So I was seriously looking at perhaps putting up a microgrid in my backyard, and I looked at the numbers. You can get a power wall for 40, 50 grand. And if you look at it and do the math, about $300, $400 a month in electric bills, it's a payback of about 10 to 12 years. And if I can power my Tesla also using the same charges, after that, it's all free. Is there a flaw in the math? Or is that where you think the trend is headed? It also takes care of storage. So what do you think about all those items? Technology, the trend, and what are we going to be seeing down the line, Alex?
Yeah, so I think your math is correct, except you don't need the Powerwall to power your Tesla. The Tesla is the Powerwall, right? It's a Powerwall on wheels, so you don't usually keep two. And so if you have your Tesla parked in at home, you can power your home with your Tesla. That feature they don't have turned on, but it works. And so what we see we've seen some of the numbers to prove this out, is that in places like California, where they have, kind of the more regulated prices, let's put it that way, you can actually already make money and pay off your vehicle and your charger, but just by participating in the market. And so we see basically this combination of electric vehicles, bidirectional connectivity from homes and businesses, and if you have a fair market where you get paid as much as when you buy electricity, we're going to have a lot more flexibility in the system for backup, which will be helpful for a lot of these micro fluctuations and voltage stabilization. It may not, help for, a large event when you get a gigawatt fall off at a time, but for kind of ramp up, ramp down, when there's, a lot of these vehicles are going to be parked. And I think that's going to be quite powerful. And I think we'll see that model, and we'll see a lot of new models about business developers coming in and aggregating neighborhoods with community power, and maybe even in some neighborhoods offering steep discounts for for buying your Tesla, or for putting in bidirectionality, as long as you give them the access rights to run it when you're not using it. And I think it's these business models that are going to kind of drive the change, because it's going to be entrepreneurs who find the ways to squeeze the money between the regulated and unregulated models, the inefficiency in the systems, and they'll be bringing in these technologies, but the innovation is going to be the financial engineering and the customer interface. And I think that there's strong opportunities for that.
Alex, I have a question. Recently, I've been working in a community in Wyoming, and we're looking at a power plant that is a coal-fired power plant, but at least one of the units has been converted to a peaker plant, converted to gas. Mm-hmm. And they basically told me that if they run that peaker plant 2 weeks out of the year, they make more money than running it all year round.
That's true.
So why are we not putting more power, maybe at a little bit more cost, even if that be the case, rather than, whether it's winter or summertime, be basing our whole grid, whether the peaker plants will kick in and work or not. And in this particular case, the peaker plants did not.
So if you look at the stack and ERCOT, and they make that public, and I haven't looked at it in probably maybe 6-7 months, but what you had is basically a lot of wind coming in. So these are projects that are asking for permission, so you can see that stack. That's public data. A lot of wind power coming in. And then basically everything else is wind peakers. There wasn't a single combined cycle plant in the mix, right? And the reason is to the point, is that when these peakers kick in, they kick in when the power price is high, and otherwise they kind of sit idle. But they're a lot cheaper than a combined cycle plant. Those plants are significantly more expensive to buy, and they're significantly more expensive to maintain, and they have to run base load. And this is kind of goes to the market mechanism. Right now, the price in this market isn't generally high enough for them to put in new ones. So there's not a forecast that power prices are going to increase enough for over 20 years that you're going to put that in. And so that's why we're seeing this mix between you have the solar and the wind and the peakers, and in theory that creates the base load, right? So we're having synthetic base load being created, but it does depend on the peakers functioning when they should, and that's a function of the market, either paying them or penalizing them for not doing that.
Okay, thanks.
Ram, let me throw up a cartoon here which captures what Alex has talked about in terms of overlaying that microgrid concept. Let me see if I can jump to this screen share.
So while we are waiting for that,
Yeah.
Yes. Able to bring it up?
Go ahead. You keep talking. Yeah. You keep talking.
Okay, so we're able to see that. I think if you want to show a slide, you need to just show that screen. We are seeing your entire screen. Okay, now I'm seeing it. Yes. Can you blow this up, please?
Yeah. Oops.
No. Back to how it was before. Yeah.
Okay, this is a very bad depiction, but in terms of what Alex was talking about, so you have your conventional substation. You have the main power plant somewhere here, and it's bringing it down to the substation level. And then you use the smart inverters, and here you have the local microgrid network, what you talked about. And you have homes with solar rooftops on them. And then you have the EV vehicles here, which can draw power from the microgrid. And then on the side, you have your local form of generation. It could be fuel cells or solar or wind, and you can throw in a backup storage. So this is sort of a microgrid network, which is in line with what Alex was talking about, and it will lay on top of the existing electricity grid, and it will be connected to the smart inverter, so you can have flow going both this way and also reverse back onto the grid.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and maybe Dharma, you want to speak to that as well first, is that there right now what we're missing is some of these societal value aspects of, such as, what is the value of a hospital not losing power, right? What is the value of a police station not losing power? What's the value of someone who's, on some kind of home emergency device not losing power, right? And right now we have no way of actually managing that at a individual asset level for most places when the power kind of goes off. Do you have any thoughts about, what can be done around that within this idea of a microgrid and ensuring that, when there are emergencies, these key industries and key, value drivers around health and safety are maintained first, and that being the driver of reliability. That's the type of reliability we need. I don't need my home to be reliable, but certainly I want the fire station and the person next door who's on a ventilator to be, have their power.
Yeah, Alex, as we experienced recently, a lot of these critical services like hospitals, fire stations, police stations, they had the uninterrupted power supply. So that information is available, and the distributing the T&D utilities, they can send up needed power to those critical areas. And that was one of the reasons that there was a big hue and cry that people were being shortchanged, because they said, like for instance, my house is close to a fire station, and I had uninterrupted power supply because of the reason that it was part of that node, whereas 2 streets down the road, they were on a different circuit and they lost the power. So that infrastructure is already there through the smart meter system. So I don't think that's going to be an issue.
But yeah,
Hopefully.
the point is that I understand that they have that on the circuit level, but that's all they have. Right now you can't discriminate within the circuit, right? So if there's like 10 homes in my neighborhood and one of them has emergency power need, there's nothing that can be done. It's either we all have power or none. Are you kind of seeing opportunities and interest in actually getting it to the smart meter where 9 out of the 10 homes can be shut down, but the one is kept up?
Yeah, with the two-way dialogue, it's possible to do that, and that's exactly what the ERCOT attempted to do. They told these guys have a rolling blackout, and they didn't end up doing that. A lot of them experienced this extended outage because they didn't capitalize on that opportunity to route to the critical circuits.
Mm-hmm.
So the technology is there. It's a question of
So, what we saw is exists there in bits and pieces here and there, right? So back to one of the things we touched on earlier. If a lot of it exists, where are the gaps and challenges and opportunities? And Alex, let me be even more specific with you. You were talking to entrepreneurs, and there are a lot of them on the call here today. What do you think you are not seeing? Are you seeing interesting deals that you can share with us? And again, what do you like to see more of, and you're not seeing from a VC standpoint, from a capital standpoint? There's a lot of capital out there. The street is flush with capital. Do we have enough ideas in terms of the things that we need to solve? Is in this whole equation, are the challenges in storage, or in the challenge in distribution, or the challenge in, you know what I mean? So
yeah, I think one of the big missing pieces, I think, is around creating effective business models to bring the technologies together. I think a lot of the technologies are there, but they're not being linked together, and they're not being put together in a way that is easy for the consumer or even for a smart consumer to take up. So kind of I think the point was Dharma was making, or you were making, about, how difficult it is to choose an electricity provider. I think it's also very difficult to take a smart choice on a solar provider. A lot of them will purposefully, take advantage of people if they think they can pay, and there's not a lot of transparency in the system. And secondly, there's not a lot of not enough pursuit of ways to reduce the soft costs. So right now in a residential solar system, more than 50% of what you're paying for is for their marketing to you, the finance, closing costs, engineering, everything else, which should be standardized away. So finding solutions to standardize the whole process from sales to engineering to interconnect, speed it up, get the costs out, I think is the biggest near-term solution around existing technologies, and then finding better solutions that increase the connectivity between them. So there's good kind of smart inverters out there, better smart inverters, cheaper smart inverters, ways that they better interconnect. But I think the pieces are there, but we still haven't done a good job of putting them together and then finding a way to get the consumer, especially the residential and small commercial, to take them up. And we need to do that much better. We need to have massive increase in growth in these types of systems in order for us to take that to take that big leap to a decarbonized system. But also, once we get to this critical mass, I think there'll be other opportunities that entrepreneurs will be able to do around trading and optimization between homes and between regions, but we need to get to higher critical mass to do that. And so that's kind of where we're looking for innovation, is around how to put these pieces together in a way that creates money, because once you have that, there'll be a lot of money coming to do that, and that's a very repeatable and scalable business.
Interesting, interesting. So integration, maybe a little bit of financial engineering. I don't know, maybe I'm being too simplistic about summarizing it, but
yeah, and simplifying, I think we talked about this in our pre-call, simplifying regulation. So finding ways to work with cities to simplify the ways these systems come in. And I think this becomes a role again for companies, because if the companies don't push for it and they say, well, we're not going to go and work in your city, and your city isn't going to get these tax revenues because you're overly complicated, I think that cities may begin to listen to that, right? When they see that, someone's getting the benefit of a better grid and they're getting other benefits in terms of taxes, they'll make those decisions. But right now, the outdated regulations for not just solar, but building codes in cities is really hampering our bringing in a number of new technology solutions to consumers.
okay. So what do you think, Dharma? What would you say in terms of opportunities for entrepreneurs?
Oh, it's plenty. The opportunities are plenty. As Alex pointed out, again, going back to my experience as planning and zoning commission for a city, we threw these kinds of concepts in new home developments, but again, the stigma was with the developers. There was a pushback from them. They're saying that these kinds of community-based solar and being self-sufficient is going to drive up their cost of doing business. So our recommendation to the city council was that we need to put in place these specific requirements that if you want to do business with us at the city level, that you need to be a little more futuristic in your thinking. And in line with Alex's comment, the technology is there. We just need to string it together and offer it as a package, and importantly, have a demonstration type setup. It can be done. It can be done.
So, Angelos, from a VC investor standpoint, what would you like to see more of that you're not seeing, and what is your advice to some of the investors here that are looking for some good opportunities?
Well, I see a lot of incentives out there to put solar in your homes. I don't necessarily see a whole lot of incentives to put solar on buildings, small commercial buildings. I get 10 calls a day for putting solar on my home, which doesn't work, but I get 0 calls to put, with incentives, to put a 200 kilowatt unit on my building, which is perfect for it. Secondly, Elon Musk now is a Texas resident. He has solutions that might work, and I wonder what would be the possibility of really aligning with people like him and others that will provide strong solutions for the future reliability of our electric grid via the storage technologies that are out there already. Somewhere in there, the public domain has to align itself with the private sector through strategic partnerships to solve this problem and make sure that it doesn't happen again. So Tesla is one of those potential partners. From a venture capital perspective, I see a lot of private equity that has gone into funding solar and wind projects. I don't necessarily see a lot of venture capital going into technology innovation in this space. A lot of money has been poured into energy savings and all of that, and none of these have become to scale where anybody has made any money yet. And I just don't see a whole lot of money from the venture capital industry going into that sector.
Okay.
Which is unfortunate.
Let me piggyback on that, Angelos, with your unique perspective. I know you have a number of deals in other parts of the world. Do you see some innovation happening in other parts of the world that we could possibly emulate here in our markets, or is that not really the case? What do you think, Angelos?
Well, I mean, innovation in particularly on energy sources has been abandoned throughout the world, and not so much as just electricity, but for many, many years, Brazil has been a great example of providing, I guess, an incentive to agriculture to produce enough harvest to be turned into energy. They've been sourcing energy out of agriculture for 40% or more of their needs, actually more so, now that I think about it. We are an energy hog, and it's part of our capitalistic system. Saving energy is not necessarily within our DNA. You know, we have money, we'll spend it, we'll do whatever it takes to enjoy life and run businesses efficiently, but about energy savings, I think is almost an afterthought and only the focus of very few industries, unfortunately. That's how I see it. It's to save something is almost anti-capitalistic in our DNA in the US.
Yeah,
it's all about spend and consume, spend and consume.
Right. That conspicuous consumption, especially when it comes to critical sources like electricity, after water and food, electric power is very close to essential things. And and especially when we have learned to live with such abundant supply of that, and it's very hard to realize that there may be some critical situations when we'll be out of it. So that's a very different debate altogether. I know we are getting close to our top of the hour here. I'm looking at all the questions that have been posted, and I'm trying to pick a couple of these that might be relevant. And if I may just summarize some of these things into a couple of key bullets. What would you, two things. One, entrepreneurs, what would you suggest to them, those energy enthusiasts, entrepreneurs, and what would you suggest to them? What would you advise them? And then for angels that are here, what would you say are the opportunities? And Alex, perhaps we can start with you, and then Dharma and Angelos.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll have to leave in 3 minutes, so thank you for that word. I think there are a lot of opportunities for angels in you know, whether you're looking at Texas or in California. I think we just see, you know, California is an issue of wildfires right now. We have had freezing temperatures. We're going to again have heat, and then we're going to have somewhere else. We're going to have you know, a flood, and so resiliency is going to begin getting priced into the system, and people are willing to pay for comfort. There, you know, people buy backup, you know, gas generators for thousands of dollars to use like once or twice a year. So there certainly is a market for that. And I think the question is, you know, how do we, you know, bring that market of resiliency to, you know, a larger group of people who right now maybe cannot afford it. And I think that's kind of the work of the entrepreneurs, is to come up with ways to try to do that from both a financial and business and technology linking aspect. I think, you know, certainly microgrids are going to be the big topic of how things happen. And I think, you know, entrepreneurs will have a strong play in how these things get rolled out. So I'm very, you know, bullish about us being able to solve these issues. And I think that, you know, the opportunities are there, and it's just, I think, a question of, you know, to the point that was made about getting enough capital, enough people working on the problems, and unfortunately to the point that there certainly aren't enough venture capital dollars or people in place for these solutions, because they perceive as being a long-term solution, long-term payback, and they flock to other places that are more profitable, but have less societal impact in basic goods. And that's probably maybe a discussion for another time, why that's happening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Angelos?
Well, I again think that capital is the main culprit here. There's not enough capital of scale to bring a whole lot of new technologies to the market. Angel funding is there, but angel funding is not going to solve this problem because it's never to scale. And more than that, I mean, venture capital philosophy does not align, as Alex mentioned, with long-term investments. A venture capitalist wants to invest and get out in 3 or 4 years. I don't think we're even looking at a payback for some new technologies in 3 to 4 years. Longer-term investments, and therefore there will always be lack of interest from the venture capital community to fund this kind of projects. I think this of course was a wake-up call for the state of Texas. We are a proud state that always.
Hey, 1 second, Angelos, before you just left, I just wanted to say thank you to Alex, but I will separately tell him. Thank you. He had to rush. Go ahead, Angelos.
We are a proud state, independent. We pride on our independence and doing things differently in Texas. And this has been an aberration that has taught us a lesson. And whether we learn from it or in a few months we're going to kind of blow it away or not, I think that remains to be seen. But my view is that for change to occur almost in every state, including Texas, there has to be an economic development story behind it. And unless we articulate both the economic impact, the cost and the benefits to economic development, and whether a city or a state will be less attractive to certain types of economic development coming to the state, then you don't really get a push for action at the legislative level. So we have to tie this particular challenge we've had into economic development in order for us to see action.
Dharma, on your closing thoughts?
Well, in terms of where to look for technology, I'll go back. I'll recommend that you go back to the backside of the globe, such as in India, where the new concept is the push towards looking at DC-based concepts, because it brings synergies with respect to the electricity demand. And if you're looking at a microgrid or even an application based on your, including in your home, you're essentially looking at a small footprint for your solar system, a small battery, and these DC-based appliances afford those kinds of opportunities. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the appliances are also being developed. So going forward, new home developments and whatnot can look at these types of concepts. And it's a question of trying to import those technologies here. And there's some sort of pushback because most of it's AC based. And so in terms of investment opportunities for angels and others, you probably need to reach to the backside of the globe. And one thought with respect to this, the current situation, the exceptionalism that's prevalent in Texas, we cannot afford to be electrically an island of sorts. We need to be interconnecting with the grids on either side for reliability purposes, and that's also going to help bring the cost down. And so that's what I have to offer at this point in time.
Okay. Well, on that note, gentlemen and ladies that are all on the call here, it's obviously a very complex topic with a lot of angles to it, and I'm sure there's going to be some follow-up interest levels on specific areas that we can pursue in the coming weeks and months. I wish we could continue on some of these themes here, but in the interest of time and what else we have got going this afternoon. I want to thank you all once again, and we'll follow up with you with a recording of this session. And any questions you might have was a follow-up on specific themes you want to pursue in our sessions to follow, just let us know, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much. Again, on behalf of my counterparts in Houston and Austin, Ram Shenoy and Jai Shivakil, thank you very much. Once again, thank you to the panelists, Dharma Dharmarajan, Angelos Angelou, and Alex Rozenfeld. Have you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.